Hi, I'm Joe Everett. Welcome to the GB Tech Center. I'm here with Zach Everett, a project engineer. Today in this video we're going to be discussing some important installation and technical tips regarding the Ford 6-liter injector. But before we move on to that, we want to discuss some important maintenance items that need to be done at the same time we service the injectors. Zach, what do we have here?
Well, Joe, if you open up the hood of one of these pickups, you're going to notice this thing staring right back at you. What we've got here is our oil filter housing along with our secondary fuel filter housing. Now it's important anytime we do any sort of service on these injectors that we replace these at that time. When you initially remove this oil filter, you're probably just going to want to throw this away. But let's take a moment and give this a little bit of an inspection. Let's make sure there's no contamination or any sort of metal debris lying inside this filter.
Yeah, that's an important point. If you have metal shavings inside this filter, it could indicate the failure of a high-pressure oil pump. Last thing you want to do is replace the injectors and have metal shavings go into the new injectors.
That's right, Joe. Now, we're going to install a new O-ring on here. Make sure we lubricate this with clean engine oil and install our new element. After that, we can tighten this down and we'll move on to our secondary fuel filter here. The same rules apply here. We don't want to rush this job. We want to make sure we take our time and take a look at this element. Make sure there's no contamination in here, and we're also going to want to look inside the bowl and make sure there's no contamination here either. After that, we can install a new O-ring, make sure we lubricate this, and install our element. Then, install into the body, and we're good to go.
And I noticed you said secondary fuel filter. It's important to remember that on the 6-liter there's actually two fuel filters. There's a primary fuel filter that's located in the horizontal fuel conditioning module down on the frame rail. It's important that you replace both of these. A little bit more work, but it's cheap insurance to make sure your injectors work. Now there's one area we need to pay attention to before we move on, and that's this fuel pressure regulator that's on the side of the housing here. This regulates the fuel pressure to the injectors, and the stock setting is about 45 psi, but unfortunately Ford realized at some point that that wasn't quite high enough and they were having some injector issues with it. So they released this thing called a Blue Spring kit. What it does is it increases the fuel pressure from about 45 psi to 55 psi. And what it consists of is a new, longer, stronger spring than the stock. Installation is pretty straightforward. There's 4 screws. You just unscrew this housing and you're going to remove all this, and you'll notice the stock spring is going to be inside this little brass valve. You're going to remove that, discard the old spring, install the new, longer, stiffer spring inside there, install it into the housing. You're going to want to replace this keyhole gasket and this O-ring. GB's kit comes with all of this. You're going to want to install this housing, you're going to want to torque it, and then of course, you're going to want to do a leak test. Make sure that there's no fuel leaking into the engine. That's very critical. Now we can move on. Alright, now that we have our injector, let's go over some of the characteristics of this injector before we continue. You'll notice here we have 2 O-rings. This seals the fuel chamber, which is common to all 4 injectors on one bank. The fuel actually enters the injectors through these small filters which provide some filtration before it gets to the nozzle section of the injector. On this side we have the oil control section, and you'll notice we have 2 solenoids. One is an on solenoid, one is an off solenoid, and these are pulsed by the thickum, and this controls the spool valve position inside the top section here. What this does is it determines whether the injector gets actuated or not by controlling the oil flow through the top section. One of the areas of concern here is this spool valve has really tight tolerances in it. It's very critical that the oil is maintained, and we've already discussed that. But any contamination in the oil can result in stiction of this, and it's a common problem on the Ford 6-liter. Can result in intermittent misfires and very frustrating to try to diagnose. On this side we have the copper gasket, and this provides a combustion seal when the injector is installed and torqued into the cylinder head. But this is an area that also has some issues, and you'll notice here that this injector is all black. And Zach, what happened here?
Well, what we have here is an injector that's either been improperly torqued or we've left off the copper gasket during the installation. This will result in several different failure modes. First one being the combustion gases will bypass the copper gasket, melt our lower O-ring here, and get gases into our fuel system. This will result in misfires on multiple cylinders. Secondly, the fuel will leak past this lower O-ring into your combustion chamber and cause your engine to hydrolock. And thirdly, the tip of this injector will superheat, causing the nozzle to stick open, which will cause catastrophic engine damage.
Well, none of those sound any good, but let me ask you this. If I pull an injector out that looks like this, do I have to do anything other than just install a new injector?
Absolutely. If you pull out an injector and it looks like this, you're going to want to make sure you replace your injector cup. The bottom of it is undoubtedly pitted and scorched, and it won't provide a good seal surface for your new injector.
All very good points, Zach. Let's move on and talk about the oil rail installation. All right, what we have here is our high pressure oil rail. Zach, why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, well, when we look at our oil rail here, we're going to see 4 ball tubes sticking out of the top of it. These are going to connect to the top of our injector and supply them with high pressure oil. Now, they're called ball tubes because at the bottom of them, they have a ball shape to them. This is going to allow them to swivel around inside this socket, making it easier to align with our injectors.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that underneath each one of these rail tubes is a high pressure seal. These can become brittle and cracked over a period of time and result in leakage. So if you reuse these, you want to make sure that these operate smoothly and they're not too loose. You'll also want to check this surface area to make sure there's no burrs or any type of pitting that will result in a tearing of the O-ring when it gets installed.
And that's right. And if you do find any sort of issues with these, GB offers a ball tube kit that services one bank. It's going to come with 4 ball tubes and 4 high pressure oil seals.
Zach, it also looks like it comes with a tool.
Yeah, that's right. This tool is what we're going to use to remove and install our ball tubes. But it also serves as a good alignment tool, so that way everything is straight before we torque down onto our injectors. And it's important to remember that we should fill the inlet of these with oil. This is going to act as a lubricant between our ball tube and our O-ring, but it serves as a good primer as well. That way we get a quick startup after our install.
Yeah, and another point to make here is GB now offers this valve cover gasket set that services one side. It's a complete kit. It comes with a reusable gasket and a complete seal kit. So we have everything here to do the job right the first time. So thanks for watching our video. If you have any questions regarding the 6-liter or any product that we offer, just feel free to call our tech line. Please subscribe to us on YouTube for more technical information.